Look, you're all experienced drivers when it comes to this type of weather, so I don't believe that any of you are going to have any serious issues. You know what it is? It's those people who've moved here from out of state, and when they come here, not me included, obviously not, but when they come here and they get their first taste, perhaps, of a little bit of snow on the ground, they really don't know how to deal with all of that. And then sometimes we have people who do forget over the course of several months since the last big snowfall what it's like. But just a caution out there, some places just to our south got really clobbered with snow during the course of the overnight. About 5 o'clock this morning, as I was coming into work, the raindrops started to change slightly to splat, and it was more of a just a sleet that was hitting my windshield. It wasn't really though until about 7 o'clock that we at our studio started seeing the changeover to snow, and then about 20 minutes ago, it became heavy snow. Now, all of this is not likely going to be sticking around with us, but in a matter of the last few minutes, I walked into the studio 1 minute after 8 o'clock. It's almost 8 minutes now after 8 o'clock, and we have dropped from 34 to 32. But we may bottom out here as we head towards sunrise, and things will start to turn around, and the snow is going to taper off too as well this morning, which is, I think, for most people. Sure, it's pretty to look at, but you don't want to look at it for very long. 8 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Steve Millington joining us in about 20 minutes. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. And then just after 9 o'clock news today, Matt Towery is going to join us. If you don't know who he is, he's a nationally syndicated columnist. If you read Town Hall, townhall.com, he is one of the regular columnists there. Matt Towery is a former Georgia state legislator. We have a mutual friend in my buddy Phil Kent, and Phil was telling me the other day that Matt has written a new book. And it's about how media coverage impacts, that is, financial market coverage impacts people's investing and how they invest. And sometimes there might be some bias involved in that, and it may not serve you. So Matt's scheduled to join us just after 9 o'clock 9 o'clock news this morning. He'll talk for a few minutes about what you should know and, how you might want to look sometimes at financial reporting and question what you're actually hearing. So those things are on the way a little bit later this morning. I do want to open up and mention, I was still in the office yesterday. I hadn't gone home yet. I usually leave noon, 1 o'clock every day and head out to do some either shopping or go home and take care of some things around the house. But just as I was getting ready to leave, a news release came in from Idaho State Police, and it was about the story out of Adams County here in Idaho, where deputies responded to an accident scene, and a car, it wasn't a big car either, it was a Subaru, had actually struck a bull that apparently had gotten out and was in the road. The people inside the Subaru were hurt. They had to be airlifted for treatment. Deputies arrived. Deputies were trying to extricate them, which, you don't just yank someone out unless the car's on fire, because you don't know if it's a spinal injury or whatever may be going on. And with that, the bull got aggressive. And the bull tried, apparently, to charge rescuers as well as deputies. Now, I understand that bulls can be a very expensive piece of property if you're a rancher. I used to do live remotes. There was a fellow in Maryland who used to be, he owned a string of barbecue stands, and I used to go do live remotes at his barbecue stands. His name was Jake Emming. Jake Emming had been a cattleman, and he had been a business partner in the cattle business with John Lennon of the Beatles. John Lennon, despite being a liberal, was not what you would call, he didn't sit around eating vegetables all the time. He enjoyed beef himself and realized that bulls, some of them, prize bulls, are very good investments. I know a little bit about the business as well because one of my cousins, my cousin's parents were auctioneers, cattle auctioneers. So I have some understanding of the value of this bit of property. What happened was, if you probably heard the story, but if you're new to this, the ranchers showed up who owned the bull just as deputies were getting ready to put it down because, you know what, they need to get these people out of this car. And to them, human life is more valuable than the bovine life. With that, the rancher, now this is the story that we have so far, and obviously there is an investigation going on, but with that, the rancher pulled out a rifle and a shooting match ensued. The thing is, most police officers are pretty good dead-eye shots. They have a lot of practice when it comes to actually firing their sidearms, and even sometimes long guns, because they may need those in certain critical instances. The rancher is dead. If you didn't know that, he was killed then in that shootout. I'm sure he came along, and he was a well-known man in the community, but he came along and said, "You're not going to put down my $1 million bull," and decided he was going to, pull out a firearm. When you point that at a sheriff's deputy, you better be cognizant of the fact that deputy may fire back. And one of the deputies was wounded, luckily not life-threatening injuries. We had a caller last week who screamed and jumped up and down because I defended police officers and other law enforcers on the air. When I hear from those people, I always wonder, all right, who hit them over the head with a truncheon, and what did they do to deserve it? Because if this is the type of situation where people were in harm's way. You had people in an automobile who needed to be evacuated, airlifted out of there quickly, their own lives depending on it. And then the rescuers and the law enforcers, they were also in danger because of this. And I don't care how much your bull costs. You have a depraved indifference to human life. If you somehow believe you should be able to go out there and ward everyone off, what did the rancher expect? The two people in the car should just die so he could continue his profit? That's the part that I find the most. And when I read that he was well known in the community and well respected, hey, that's fine. But he had a bad moment, and he paid for his bad moment with his life. And I am sick to death of hearing about how law enforcement just overreacts in these situations. Lives were at stake, human lives, and they are certainly much more valuable than an animal's life. It's 8:13. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. If you're not aware of it, the pushback has finally started. The Americans who actually support law enforcement in this country are starting to get their act together after a good 18 months of having law enforcement denigrated by the Obama White House, his Justice Department, your rap singers or hip-hop or whatever they call it, and this Black Lives Matter group, who have made policing and law enforcement altogether a very difficult job, and a much more difficult job than it already was. This is appearing last night on Sean Hannity's program on the Fox News Channel, the father of Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino is the guy who makes all of those bloodthirsty, blood-filled, gory movies that the critics just happen to love. His father is also an actor and a director and a musician and happened to appear last night. And Dad is not happy that his son went to a rally in New York City a couple of weeks ago and called police officers murderers. This is Tony Tarantino speaking with Sean Hannity.
It's not him I'm criticizing, it's his actions and the things that he had to say on the spur of the moment without taking the time to really think about what he's doing. He didn't look at both sides of the story. I'm here not just because I'm his biological father, but because of being a concerned citizen for what's right in our communities today. And it's extremely close to me because I have so many relatives on NYPD. I have two cousins on my father's side, Lieutenant Johnny Massaro, a horseback cop, retired. His son continued the tradition.
But Tony, you say spur of the moment. That didn't sound spur of the moment. These seemed like planned remarks. He went to the rally. He was prepared to speak. And obviously that's his mindset. Because otherwise he wouldn't have said it. That's outrageous.
Yeah, what he did and what he said is dead wrong. A 100% on that.
Now, you see, you have families who are being split by this issue. And somehow, there are people in Washington who are rubbing their hands together in glee because it's tearing apart the American people. And that seems to be what their ultimate goal is in everything that they happen to do. One of them happens to live at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's 8:15, Bill Colley with you. And this really, I said 18 months. It goes all the way back to that story about Professor Skip Gates at his home in Massachusetts when he came home from vacation and had forgotten his key and locked himself out. He was trying to break into his house, and a policeman stopped him. And then this whole thing started, well, the police only did that because he was a black man in a wealthy neighborhood. I'll tell you what, if you're a police officer and you're driving down the street and you see someone trying, I don't care what color they are, trying to open up a door with a screwdriver or knock out a window, you might just decide something there isn't quite kosher and you're going to stop and you're going to ask some questions. And in Skip Gase's case, he mouthed off, so the police, they ended up handcuffing him and leading him out of the house until they figured out what was going on. And then the president jumped in, and the president tried to make life miserable once again for law enforcement. It's 34. We should point out the temperature has jumped back up a couple of degrees, so our morning blizzard could be coming to an end shortly. And would like to mention, if you're out there driving, as I said at the top of the program, be careful out there, to borrow a phrase from speaking of a police officer from the TV show Hill Street Blues. Meanwhile, there is a woman by the name of Letitia Ned. She put out a video criticizing police and actually threatening them, YouTube video, and she went on to say that we should kill all crackers. She ended up actually getting picked up by cops and being questioned about her activities because of the threats that were being made. Last night, she made an appearance on the Kelley File on the Fox News channel and tried to explain away her actions. Obviously, once you actually get caught, all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe I didn't really mean that.
I don't think that the context that I was being threatened and that video specifically was towards the people that were threatening me. So there's nothing that I could say to make it sound any better than that. When being threatened, when being called stereotypical names, racial slurs, and I responded.
How, I mean, separate and apart from what happened in your online chat, because that's where this took place, how do you feel about white people?
I don't hate white people, if that's what you're asking me, Megan. I don't hate white people. I hate injustice. And I hate corruption. And I feel that the systematic killing of black people has to be addressed.
So I'm going to go out and say, hey, kill all crackers and kill all cops. Gee, I can't understand why anybody would be upset by that. When they had that rally in New York City a couple of weeks ago where Quentin Tarantino shot off his mouth, it happened 3 days after a New York City patrolman was shot and killed by a career criminal. Now, the New York City patrolman didn't happen to be a cracker. He happened to be a black man, which shows you that this is much more serious than any racial divide they're trying to gin up with all of it. The fact of the matter is, the more people in government create that hostile environment, you're going to have these situations arise. That situation yesterday in Adams County, obviously unrelated to all of these other issues on the side, but it does show you the contempt a lot of people have for law enforcement and just how difficult that job actually has to be. And those men could have been killed by this guy, all because he was more concerned, as I said earlier, about his profit than he was about injured people whose lives were in danger following the accident. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Don't know what to make of this temperature gauge. Back to 32. This snowy morning across the Magic Valley.